What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. I'm the design lead of Summoner's Rift Team's live pod, and I'm here to talk to you about patch 25.7. This is a relatively small patch. It's also midnight for me when I'm starting the recording here, so I'm going to try to go pretty quick so I can go to bed on a somewhat reasonable time. A couple topics to discover here or talk about here. We'll start and just kind of tell the story here. You may have seen in the first stand patch, the one where we added lane swap detection, there is a bug with turret aggro where the turret would seemingly randomly switch targeting for no good reason while, minion waves were attacking under the turret. And from looking at it, it was pretty obvious that whatever was happening, the minions were pulling a call for help, and the turret was triggering, listening to the call for help and then switching targets, because when a minion hits a champion will trigger a mechanic called a call for help. Minions will do this too. Turrets, I think, can also do this. And then that will force things to switch aggro to it. Now, normally a turret will, if it's hitting a minion, will stay hitting that minion until a champion calls for help from another champion hitting it. Otherwise, they won't switch. It'll stay on the same target. And so, incidentally, on the exact same patch that we added lane swap detection, this came in as well. Like, okay, that's kind of weird. But I'm looking at the games that are getting reported and the ones that are getting recorded, and I'm like, okay, it's clearly happening in exact timings when a minion's hitting a champion, the champion's hitting triggering a call for help, and so the turret's switching aggro. Okay, I get that. But when it's happening, there's no lane swap going on. In fact, you can repro it in a 1v0 game. It is impossible for lane swap detection to fire when there's no one on the enemy team. How would they lane swap? And so I looked at this and I was like, well, that's weird, but the buffs wouldn't be firing. I know what the logic is. None of the logic fires. It will look for a jungler constantly. It'll look for a jungler. It'll look for two champions in the lane. It'll do a bunch of checks. But why would the turret having a buff and just checking the world, why would that make it suddenly trigger a call for help or listen to a call for help? That doesn't make any sense. I don't really get it. And then we got another small bit of information, which was our QA, who did a great job at kind of sussing this out long term, was like, hey, it's happening at really specific points in time. And I'm like, well, it's interesting because that's those times are after lane swap detection is done. It's the buff isn't even on the turret anymore by the time this is happening. So it can't be the lane swap buff. This doesn't make any sense. I understand that it happened the same patch we made this change, but this doesn't make any sense. Why would it be my stuff? It's happening after the buff is already gone. And it's in a 1v0 game, so the buff never even fires into other champions or other minions. There is a mechanic where it'll put a buff on enemy minions. That's how the minions redirect their gold and XP to the allied champion hiding in her tower. But again, it never puts the buff on them because it'll trigger in a 1v0 game. It'll trigger when there's no lane swaps, right? The bug will happen. So it's this makes no sense. What's going on here? So he narrowed it down to a specific change. So he's like, hey, if I revert before and after this point in time, I can't replay the bug anymore. It's really happening here. And I finally took another second to look at it, and I was like, oh, I finally get what's happening here. I know the line's happening. It's not the buffs. It's for some reason. So what we do with the logic is, and it's actually not needed anymore, so it was kind of an oversight to have left it in, but it was harmless. What we did for one version of this was there's a mechanic called gold redirect target. So this can be why if Daisy kills something, Ivern gets the gold. This is how Azir turrets work. It's also just a really good way to store a reference to another champion on a unit. You say, hey, I'm Azir turret. My gold redirect target is Azir. So whenever I kill something, if I earn gold, just give the gold to Azir. Whatever I would have earned, it goes to Azir instead. And so that's very convenient. It's very useful. It's a great way for pets to make sure they give the gold to the right person. All that kind of fun stuff. No problem. And again, you can do a fun stuff with that because you are storing a reference to a unit. Well, one of the bits of logic here was that if lane swaps were detected, it would tell all the minions, hey, find the nearest allied champion and set them as your gold redirect target. So if you kill something, give it to the Cassandra who's hiding in her tower. Go do that. Then eventually we changed it to just putting a buff on the minions. The minions would say, if I'm about to kill something, instead donate the kill over. Sure, okay. To TLDR, why the bug actually happened now was at the very end when lane swap detection turned off. It was well, let's revert all these rules. And so I said, okay, for each minion, I need you to identify yourself and then set yourself as your own gold redirect target. There's no scripting block for remove redirect target. We never built that because there's no reason to like have it normally. So I said, okay, well, instead of giving you Exante, just fire it once. Okay, lane swap protection is over. Like the thing is dispelled. You know, all the stuff's gone. Free roam in the lanes. Melee minions, caster minions, just target yourself and say, I'm my own gold redirect target. For some reason, that lets minions trigger specific calls for help at specific timings that makes a turret switch aggro. Why? I don't know. I also don't really care. We commented out the line or deleted the line. I deleted the line from the script because we don't need it because we're using a buff instead, and the bug's fixed. We chose to micropatch it. It got micropatched a couple days ago, I think Monday of this week. So it's fixed. Why? Don't know. Very strange, but that's the bug. Anyway, going into this patch, we are updating Yorick. There are some systems changes around lane swapping and fountain regen, as well as some various item changes. So there's regular balance stuff going on. And then we're going to talk really briefly about stuff that we would have wanted to put into the patch, but we realized actually the best version of this is would require localization and a bit more investigation. We tend to not want to localize changes this week. The localization lock is last Friday, and we identify reactive balance changes at the beginning of this week when we can get some decent solo queue data. Ultimately, the things that we chose to punt were not immediately pressing. They're not immediately on fire. The best version, they require localization. So we're like, well, we'll just do them on like Wednesday or Thursday or Friday. We'll get them in, and then they'll just you'll see them on PvE in a week. Okay, let's go into the topics themselves. Yorick has an update. I have an entire video on this channel about the Yorick update. If you want to go deep dive into all the reasons why all these choices were made, feel free to watch that video. The TLDR is that Yorick is getting more Mistwalkers, as you can Q bonk a champion, large or big monster, and spawn a grave. Though that comes with Mistwalkers themselves having less DPS as time goes on. Early to mid game, it's pretty similar. Late game, it's definitely worse. Also, the functional cooldown on spawning a corpse from just minions dying near him, that's getting much shorter in the early game as well. So just overall more ghouls, especially early on, but they're a bit weaker later on in the game. They have more or less durability based on what they're hitting. They are much more durable against champions for the most part. They no longer get one shot by autos, they no longer get one shot by single target spells, but their health bar is about half as high as it was before, so AoE damage can possibly kill it. And they no longer have damage reduction to epic monsters, so that's going to be a bit frailer there as well. Next up, the Q is getting buffed, total AD ratio and cooldown buffs in the early game. The E is buffed / changed. The haste is higher. Instead of amping Mistwalker damage, it's an armor shred, which Mistwalkers can still use, but Yorick can use and his teammates can use, so it's a bit of teamfight power. The R is slightly nerfed in functional practice. Maiden will be dealing less damage per auto. This is not a very large nerf, but it's minor stuff there. And then a pretty decent amount of QOL and bug fixes. Yorick can ping his passive to count how many ghouls are on the map, so you can try to go for a high score and say, hey, I managed to push 3 lanes at once, let me show you, ping. The ghouls, Mistwalkers now update their stats consistently, so if you summon some Mistwalkers at level 2, their health, their AD, their attack speed all update. If Mistwalkers are currently attacking a jungle monster, they will ignore Yorick's recall and finish the camp for him, as long as they live, of course. The E leap will no longer fail when going over walls, so it will actually reach the target. The damage would still always happen, but they are now in melee range to go keep hitting, so that's useful there. And Mistwalkers should properly stack Black Cleaver, so if you've got 4 ghouls out there, Mistwalkers, I keep saying it, and you press E, you're going to pretty much instantly stack Cleaver there. Other minor stuff there, like other minor changes in various other places, but this is basically the rundown in Yorick. Hopefully going to be more enjoyable, better in the early game, has a real laning phase is the ideal. Of course, we're taxing his late game as a result, as a trade-off, because this champion is very powerful for a large portion of league players. This is not great in really, really high elos, and so flattening that a little bit, which means giving him some early game, trading out some late game, and moving some power around. Bunch of systems and other adjustments here going on. Lane swap detection is getting shrunk. It is not going to overlap with the jungle anymore, so this should still track most reasonable lane swaps, but it'll be much less likely that it'll hit somebody if they're simply coming out of the jungle or running around Raptor camp right as minions meet, that kind of stuff. We also have plans to re-architect this in 0.9. Not much more to say except that it'll be... We think we can completely remove all punishments from top and mid laners when doing this, while still being properly punishing to probably get rid of almost all cases of pro lane swapping. I think we're probably going to be okay with this, with swapping being viable, though very taxed in maybe like 5% of games. But we'll have to see. Again, this will happen in about 2 patches, and I think it'll be pretty decent. We are adjusting fountain regen and move speed slightly. So the thing we are trying to solve is the fact that it's a very common mid lane tactic right now to rush symbiotic souls and just spam recall off the 4-second channel, recoup to full health and mana, get back to mid lane, and pretty much lose almost nothing, and just spend your mana bar, be pretty much immune to being damaged because you have to be killed from full to die, and every 2 or 3 waves just recall, go back to full, come back to lane, recall, come back to full, come back to lane. That playstyle is pretty lame. Now, it is hard to nerf it very meaningfully. One thing to consider here is that we actually like Symbiotic Souls for supports, and by count, supports buy Symbiotic way more than mid laners do, and so we're hurting a lot of supports when they're actually... Basically, there are more supports buying souls and then mid laners fighting souls in mid. So in terms of net damage to the experience of playing League of Legends, nerfing souls hurts the experience of playing League more because there's supports who have a viable boot option that we don't want to remove. Now, could there be a long-term investigation on what this item is exactly supposed to do and find ways to clear it away from mid lane and make it better for support? That is possible. That is not what this is. We talked about it on Monday. We want to make a change, and so what we did instead is do some number adjustments to Fountain Regen and the Home Guard buff. The short of this is functionally that if you are on Fountain from very low health, you're below 1/3 or so on either health or mana, so you're waiting for the health or mana to come in, this will be the same, basically. The total time from I'm in lane or I'm in the fountain, I'm ready to leave, I get back to my spot, going to be about the same. If you are recalling at half HP or higher, half mana or higher, you're going to regen at the same or slightly slower overall, and the move speed of the home guard is going to be slightly slower, especially in the early game, such that you're going to lose a little bit more time. Now, it's hard to swing really hard on this. Of course, we wanted to remove early game recall home guard move speed. We of course could. We could tax this really, really hard. Chose to go for something fairly neutral. This will not have gigantic impacts on the sort of mid choice there, but it is a small hit that will shave off half a second, maybe a full second in some cases. That is at least something going on to tax that playstyle a little bit. Catalyst getting a pretty small buff here. We specifically want Catalyst to be more expensive than Lost Chapter. We especially don't want it to be cheaper, as Catalyst can just be a bunch of sustain and make you impossible to push out of lane. So we want the variance in Power Spike. We want that to be 100 gold more expensive, but also we want to make sure that if you get pushed to do a 1150 or 1200 gold recall, it's not quite so bad. So it's now 2 Ruby Crystals and a Sapphire Crystal. So that can be pretty helpful there as well. So that's power in just a bunch of games where you just had to buy, and now you can buy Ruby Crystal in some of these cases here. The mana on Catalyst going up by 75, pretty small buff there. The Eternity mana gain passive, which is when you take damage to health, gain some mana, that's being buffed from 7% to 10%. Now, I think this passive isn't very strong, but it was an easy round number. It was an easy buff to put in. Now you can see, hey, there's 3 lines saying Catalyst is better, so pretty meaningful buff. Of course, Rod of Ages is taking that Eternity buff as well. Small buff to Catalyst and Rod of Ages. Umbral Glaive, we know that the unique passive on that is really frustrating, and honestly, having such a short cooldown makes the gameplay pretty poor. You basically can always sweep wards at all times, and again, that gameplay is kind of poor. And so what we're doing is buffing Umbral Glaive by around 275 gold by giving it 5 AD and taking 100 gold off of the price tag. That's a pretty meaningful buff there. That's very, very, very large. But as compensation, we are nerfing the cooldown by about half, going from 50 seconds to 90 seconds, so a minute and a half there. I am pretty confident this is a full buff to Umbral Glaive. If you think that nerfing the cooldown by half doesn't make up for this, or more than make up for this, then you should have been already buying Umbral Glaive, because if you try to price out what Umbral is worth and its value as an item overall, well, if you value the passive that highly, it's already the best support or assassin item in the game. Well, only Pike buys the item, so players don't seem to think this passive is that good to be worth paying for, and so by nerfing it by half and giving it all these other stats, it's a buff to the item. It's also correct for the item overall and correct for League of Legends overall to not have the sweep be up this often. Singed, we micropatch nerfed him at the last Friday, and we made the call early this week that we want to pivot the Singed nerfs. I'm not 100% sure this is the right choice overall. I guess we'll have to see what happens here. Essentially, we micropatch nerf Singed, and his play rate remained very solid over the weekend. Of course, many players didn't know the micropatch happened, sure, but they played Singed, experienced the champion, and then kept playing Singed because the play rate didn't go down. Many times we see a champion get buffed or nerfed or whatever, and we'll see the pick rate move, and then it will like trend back toward equilibrium. For the last few days, Singed has remained completely flat here. Maybe it would have ticked down over time. Regardless, we're at a point where Singed is more popular than before, with the same win rate that he had before, which is a pretty good thing. But trying to preserve the goals here are to preserve the fact that Singed cares about his Q, the fact that Singed cares about AP, and so rebuffing the Q ability power ratio to where it was before the micro patch, and instead getting that win rate by nerfing the passive cooldown and by nerfing the stats on R. We'll see what happens. Maybe this is going to be Singed players season, and Singed players may see this and say, Q AP ratio up, great, I'm going to play more Singed over the weekend. We'll see, but that was the reason behind these changes. Yone is getting a small adjustment here. It's been in for pretty much the entire patch. We are buffing his passive crit damage to be tied with Yasuo again. No more nerf on the passive crit damage. It simply deals 1.75 the way all champions do. We are also removing the cleanse on the back half of his E. So the way his E works is when he's out there, he cannot snap back while under the effects of hard crowd control. If he's Camille ulted, Mordekaisered, stunned, rooted, whatever, any of those things, he can't snap back, and even if the timer would have run out, he's still stuck there until the Mal's ult ends, the Taric stun ends, whatever. All pretty fair, all solid treatments. What he also does, though, is because the E2 has a cast time, just as it is scripted, and this was pretty much done on purpose, it's very obviously it was in purpose in the scripting here, a quarter second after the E cast time is done, it cleanses every crowd control in the game. I'm not sure... I don't think it really makes sense to do so. Of course, we're removing this mechanic. It certainly added some skill expression to Yone, where he gets to go immune crowd control, but this is the kind of thing that I think is pretty unfair for the game. This is the kind of thing that I think is not a reasonable mechanic to keep around. And so the suggestion came up that we should remove the E-cleanse mechanic, but also bring his passive up. I agreed that was a good change. The implementation was quite easy. Kept it in for a while, seems fine. We expect this to be win rate positive, by the way. We expect the passive change to be about 3/4% of win rate. This E not cleansing will be some small amount, maybe like 0.2 down. My expectation is Yone gains about 0.5% of win rate this patch, but I think that's going to be fine. One thing to kind of tell as story time is we actually tried, or I guess I tried, but we play tested. I tried having his Q3 cast work like his Q1 and 2, which is it stops if you're stunned during the cast animation. I also tried having his Q3 dash work like Yasuo E, where if you are CC'd at any point during the dash, you stop in place. Ultimately, we decided those actually really weren't worth doing. For the one hand, both Yasuo and Yone, like Yasuo's Q3 also is uncancelable during the cast. 1 and 2 are, that's shared, but Q3 actually would always go through even if you were stunned. The other thing is that Yone Q3 is not the same thing as Yasuo E. It is not instant cast. It does not have 17 casts a second. It's just not the same mechanic. And ultimately, the experience was that they would be like, oh, I'm going to play Riven, and I'm going to like melee range stun you while you cast your Q, and I'm going to like cancel it. But because we don't kill the spell, we let you cast it again, the experience was like, why am I canceling this? He's just hitting me with it anyway. Like, there's no real benefit here. And that was true. Whereas the Yone players just felt really bad. They just like lost their spell half the time. And yeah, they'd cast again afterwards, but it felt bad for Yone and didn't feel good for his opponent. So it wasn't a very good change. And as far as the dash, yes, it can feel really bad that Yone can like Q3 through a stun and like go fly away and like immune blistering hook and stuff like that. Like, yeah, that feels kind of bad for his opponents. But realistically, it just kind of felt random when the spell would fail. Yes, of course, Yone can use it on purpose to get through stuff, but the number of times he would just be using his spells normally in a team fight and just happen to lose his dash kind of at random with no recourse. It's not like Yasuo E where you can just E a different thing and keep going. So it really felt bad as we tried, and they were not worth keeping, and so we just said passive, that's a buff, E, that's a nerf, probably went positive, here you go. Xerath is getting adjustments to push him to be better in mid lane and overall worse in support. Xerath is the kind of champion who should probably be around 51% win rate in mid lane or so. He's not. 50-ish in support is probably fine for him. 49 and change probably also okay. He's one of the higher agency supports, right? He's a mage carry. And so it's a bunch of changes that are lowering some base damage and buffing some AP ratios. Of course, mid lane Xerath has much more access to gold. It's a lot easier to get 200 AP on Xerath than it is, in the mid lane than it is at support. So that's going to be skewed as a mechanic in and of itself. And also the abilities we chose to nerf, right? Q is strictly buffed. Q is bread and butter for Xerath in the mid lane. It is wave clear. It is all that kind of fun stuff. W, E, and R are, well, okay, W is wave clear sometimes, sure, don't get me wrong, but E is very support skewed where you're just trying to look for angles the entire time and peeling people and doing all that kind of stuff. R is going to be a little bit closer, where, of course, both are going to use it. But again, AP ratio being the compensation buff here. So the expectation, the read from gameplay analysis is that's going to be about 0.7% to mid and about minus 0.5 to support. If that is wrong and he's over buffed or over nerfed, we will just simply probably do some pretty straightforward, easy changes. Not hard to do. But the goal is power positive in mid, power negative in support. If we don't get that, we will follow up next patch. We will buff or nerf as needed, and then we will hopefully get what we're looking for there. And then we go on to a slew of simple buffs. Brand Jungle, we'd like to bring him back to viability. He got pretty heavily over-nerfed by the last time we nerfed the passive explosion damage, and he's just kind of been dead for a while. Brand was a relatively popular jungle when he was good there. We see Zyra is a popular jungler. We got her to viability. She's there. She's relatively viable. She's a solid champion. She's in pro play some as one of the mage junglers out there. There are clearly successful mage junglers who have and retain an audience that are viable in high elo when they're often champions like Brand and Zyra who really aren't typically viable in high elo. They are here, and so it's like, hey, here's some more champs that are in the game. Here's some more breadth of experiences. If you really like playing mages and you just don't want to fight against Zed anymore, and you find these like 5-6 mages you can play in jungle, great. You have somewhere you can go and play and feel good about it. Could be your secondary role, that kind of stuff. We do want to offer as many different experiences as possible, as long as those experiences are good for the game. I personally don't think Brand is like intrinsically bad for League of Legends. If Brand is overpowered, if Brand is the only you can play, that's a problem. But that's a balance problem, not a Brand problem. And so pretty meaningful Brand buffs here. We expect this to be around 2.5% of win rate. That might still put Brand a little bit weak. We can follow up as needed. That's going to be fine. But we'd like to reintroduce Brand to the jungle. So that's the change here. Ivern often has extremely high MMR win rates. He is a highly main champion. Also, being an enchanter jungler, he's the kind of champion who can tend to sit at higher win rates while still feeling fair. That's just the way these kinds of champions work. Again, I point to Taric support, who is the highest win rate in the game, and no one seems to care. Not all champions are created equal. Not all champions feel equal to play against. And so, in terms of making League of Legends feel balanced and feel appropriate, I know some people don't like facing Ivern. I understand that, but Ivern deserves to be a strong champion and be rewarded for the number of mains he has, and so an Ivern buff. The designer chose an early game Q root buff, going from 1.2 to 2 to 1.6 to 2 as the root duration. I think he maxes this second typically, so he's going to feel this for a while. It's going to be a decent amount of win rate. Probably 1.25% is our kind of ballpark here. Meaningful Ivern buff. Next is a look at Olaf. It's a pretty small change. We actually think it's going to be jungle skewed here as well. Essentially, he can bring down the cast time of E a little bit by about a quarter, bit more than that, with attack speed. You know, the attack speed of his W counts. I think all sources of attack speed are going to count here. So essentially, he can shave off, about 1/10 of a second of his E cast time. So if he's chasing you down or just simply fighting in the jungle and trying to cycle through camps and deal more damage and get his next auto attack back sooner, it's going to feel a little bit better here. To me, Olaf E is the kind of spell I think is reasonable to have the spell speed up. It doesn't do any chomping forward cheating like we have with things like Trundle Q or like Briar Q and stuff like this. It's like, it's just an honest spell that deals some damage. There's no special bells and whistles really attached to it. And so, hey, it being a little bit faster for a champion who has to walk at you to do his job seems all reasonable, checks all the boxes to me of what is fair to have a slightly faster than normal cast time. There's plenty of champions I think we should not speed them up, or I think that in the past we've sped them up too much. That's hard to unwind, but I think Olaf E is fair here. AD Shaco's been bad for a while. I think, honestly, we just kind of missed. I'm not getting this sooner. I'm sorry, AD Shaco players. 5% AD ratio on the passive and on the Q. This is the pretty simple AD ratio stuff here. Again, simple change, trying to give some decent win rate to a champ that's not doing very well in that build. Shen Q is just continuing the quality of life stuff we had done from a while ago of making more of these types of abilities work on turrets. Shen Q works on structures. This means if he has bonus attack speed, he will get the attack speed during it. He's also going to consume the stack, so the attack speed eventually goes away. And the flat damage, not the percent max health damage, is going to work on structures. It's not going to be a ton of damage, but considering that Shen is often going to press Q and hit turrets for a while and sit in sideline and wait for a good ult, this is meaningful. This usually ends up being very, very little win rate overall, but it tends to feel really good. So it's a kind of change that is nice because it feels better than it actually is in win rate impact, and that's almost always good as long as you're happy with the output for the game. And in this case, Shen dealing turret damage, we're happy with that. Trundle is getting buffed. We are attempting to do an elite skewed, maybe even pro skewed jungle Trundle buff here. We've had a tank meta for a while. They're basically picking all the 4 tanks when they get a chance to in pro play, and Trundle should be out there and able to do so. Now, Trundle's pretty heavily low elo skewed right now. We're trying to unwind some of that, and the easy way to do that is the early pillar power, 3 seconds cooldown at rank 1, 4% on the slow flat at all ranks, which is pretty valuable there. Trundle's going to max E last, so 3-second cooldown, 4% slow is meaningful. It's going to help. He's going to have things to do. Goes into mid game, goes for setting up the pillars to do the objective setup. Next pillar comes up sooner. Goes for the E for the gank, 4% extra slow. Decent stuff there. Volibear, AP/tank Volibear is pretty reasonable. Seems about the right level of viable, but AD Volibear, much like AD Shaco, isn't very good right now. Now, the tough thing with Volibear is his AD ratios are mostly all in burst locations. So QR is basically a hard combo that guarantees stun into a very, very high AD ratio spell. So if you buff the Q bonus AD ratio, you're basically saying, yeah, my sort of burst combo of QR is stronger. If you buff the R ratio, obviously burst combo is stronger. And we don't really want Vulnerability to be very bursty. Tough thing with his W is a total attack damage ratio, and the rank 1 base damage is 10. Now, of course, with total AD, it's really a base damage of like 80 something. But the tough thing there is like, well, okay, we can buff the total AD ratio, which means that the nerf the base attack, like the actual base spell by some amount, and it just gets like awkward and annoying. And yeah, it's possible, but it's kind of crappy, and it's just a very annoying buff to go for. So the designer said, well, I'm going to add a new lever instead, and the damage amp of a repeated W on a target does 50% more damage. Well, that 50% more is going to scale with bonus AD, 0.15% per attack damage. So 100 AD means 15% increased damage amp. So instead of 1.5, 1.65x. And so it's a AD ratio times AD ratio for the W, which is a sustained pattern, which is a tanky pattern, which is a, build a Sundered Sky into tank items, or, get yourself a Sterix Gauge or whatever. Like, yeah, that's the kind of stuff you want in the build to be viable on an AD build. And so repeatable damage. So I think it's a good invention here by the designer. I think it's a good change. So that's the change there. We have some nerfs going on as well. These are relatively small and easy. Darius is getting -2 armor and -2 on the cooldown of his E. Pretty straightforward here. The lever the designer initially wanted was the E cooldown. We thought the magnitude there wasn't very high, so we tacked on -2 armor. This is for both Darius top and jungle, of course. He's doing fairly too well. This is partially for meta cycling as well. Darius has been kind of a top dog top laner for a while. He's always been like, yeah, pretty strong and very high ban rate, and he's kind of been there omnipresent for a long time. And so in the way that we are cycling things in that didn't necessarily need it, like Fiora by the numbers doesn't need buffs, but we want to cycle her in. Darius by the numbers is only a little bit too strong, never strong enough that we're like, oh man, and it's urgent nerf, but he's like been on the slightly strong side for 6 months or so, or maybe longer. So I was like, well, okay, here's a small nerf. You'll be slightly weak on average to cycle, again, some of the top lane meta here. Gwen, after the micro patch, in largely a pretty good state, although a little bit OP still, and we slightly still, even post micro patch, have slightly overshot on the early game skew. The goal was always to retain that Gwen is a scaler somewhat, but is not a Kale level scaler. And so the goal here is to re-add some of that scaling. Our nerfs have all been to the early game to try to move that back around. So -10 flat damage on the Q. Early game focused nerf, obviously, that matters less and less as you get more ability power and ranks in things and everything else. And then for the W resists, -3 flat, +2% on the AP ratio. So 150 AP is the break even. Again, early game nerf, late game buff. Again, the total changes is going to be win rate down. The expectation, the goal is win rate down for Gwen to the tune of about 1%. But again, trying to reshape to bring the late game back up. Lilia, very, very simple change. I actually checked this in like last Friday. Because we thought we needed the AP ratio buff on E, because the cooldown buff on E we thought wasn't going to be enough win rate magnitude. Turns out it was. Lily got significantly overbuffed in the patch, and instead of doing any kind of special invention and trying to figure out like, well, now that we're in this set of Lilia, like what's the best nerf, what's the best thing we could add and do whatever, it's like, well, we could just revert one of the buffs we did. It's very simple, very easy. We clearly were okay with Lilia's old state before, just she was a little bit weak, so we gave her some E cooldown, and then realized that, we didn't need both these levers. Cool, we'll just pull one back. Really, really simple change. Lulu, I was wrong. I thought last patch that after Lulu getting nerfed 2 patches ago, and then we nerfed her primary lane mate in Jinx, that people are going to play less Lulu. They did not do that. There was not a measurable change in pick rate at all. So I was wrong. Okay, in the future, what's interesting is, and I usually was in this space as well, but I wanted to try it and just be like, hey, Lulu is a really popular champion, very, very high pick rate. Her popular lane mate, Jinx, very, very high pick rate as well. Like, okay, we will never get more data than this. Like, these are like the 2 most picked champions in their respective roles for this patch. Like, let's see what happens. And we nerf Jinx and nothing happens to Lulu at all. They're still playing her all the time because, well, she's a really good champion. She is, of course. So, okay, cool. I had usually been in the camp of metagame impacts like that don't really matter for players, and this reinforces that stance. Yeah, metagame impacts don't seem to really change player behavior very much. So cool. So the nerf is meant to be pretty meaningful. It's meant to be pretty measurable. 10 flat damage on Q is 15 damage on a double hit, to keep in mind. The fall off for second Q is only 50%, so it's 15 damage on double Qs. That is a big deal. That does matter. You, of course, still have a 90 damage spell if you double hit, but it was 105, right? Other change is nerfing the W cooldown rank up, so it only goes down with the rank. Instead of 18 to 16, it's a flat 18. I am personally a fan of high optionality spells having long cooldowns because it is 2 spells in one, and so using it, I think it's really good if the price tag for using this spell in one of its two forms is you can't get the other for a meaningful amount of time. Instead of being like, well, I'm just going to kind of spam it and then, whatever I need will be up when I need it because whatever. I'm generally a pretty big fan of let's actually increase some cooldowns here, and I think that's going to be pretty wise. Also, it's a very, very easy nerf. We didn't think -10 on Q was going to be quite enough magnitude, so there's that nerf. About 1% win rate nerf to Lulu. Nefiri, I'm not 100% sure if the -2 armor is actually here or not, but it's minus 25 base health. Schrodinger's -2 armor. W cooldown nerfs by 2 seconds at rank 1, and you max it last, so it's nerfed in full nerf until level 14. Passive monster mod. This is Packmate monster damage, nerfed by 10% from 1.65 to 1.55, and the Q minion mod going up from 0.8x to 1.0x. The reason here is we want to nerf jungle by a bit over 2% win rate. We want to nerf mid lane by only about 1% win rate. And as the goal was to nerf some early game damage, well, 25 HP and 2 armor clearly does that. Now, the expectation was that nerf in and of itself was going to be more mid lane skewed, since jungle Nefiri can often have packmates tank the damage for her, and so she's not really losing that much health. And in general, early game durability nerfs didn't tend to be that impactful in junglers from the times we've done it before. It just doesn't tend to do that much, especially, of course, you have something like this where your dogs tank for you. W cooldown, though, very important, right? The untargetability is a really big deal here. We want that to have enough downtime that you can feel it and feel you can hit back against this champion. Pretty big deal, of course, to have that feeling be true. Passive monster mod, of course, going to be meaningful here as well. Now, keep in mind, W on cooldown is actually used by Nefiri jungle because you spawn packmates, you get bonus AD, you deal more damage, you click through the jungle. So there can be some breakpoints here where it's not up for the right time for a camp. Occasionally could matter here. Obviously, the monster mod just strictly matters here. Again, when you're summoning extra packmates, that's quite a lot of extra damage there. AD triggers through, all that kind of stuff triggers through. So about 7%, I think is the math, less damage from packmates and jungle monsters. And so because we think these are all pretty meaningful for mid lane power level, we wanted to re-add a little bit of mid lane power level to make the nerf only so large, and so basically flatten out the minion mod on Q so that Nefiri can just kind of wave clear. Now, it's worth noting that Nefiri in jungle seems to be a little bit flatter by MMR, that Nefiri jungle seems to be pretty good in high skill brackets and also quite good in low skill brackets. Nefiri mid is still seemingly pretty low MMR skewed. This appears to be the case so far with the champion. Some of that could be that low MMR Nefiri players have more experience on the champion because she's generally not been very good in high elo, and so the generically observed win rate of the champion, well, high mastery indicates high win rate. Well, low elo Nefiri players have higher mastery than high elo Nefiri players. That's a possible theory here. It'll take a long time to get enough data to know for sure. You just don't have that many high mastery players in only a single patch in certain skill brackets. It just takes a while. Nefiri's never been that, like, she's not Yasuo. It doesn't have that level of pick rate. So you need a couple of patches to build up the data set to be confident in your impact here, right, in the magnitudes of things. So long term, we can kind of suss this out eventually, but for now we can't. But regardless, early game wave clear minion damage generally will tend to be high elo skewed, which we're, I think, happy to entertain for now. Final thing to kind of bring up is we have punted some changes. We were willing to buff Zoe this patch. What we're going to look at doing is some version of alleviating the AoE damage on Q. So if you don't know, the Q deals 80% of the damage to champions that aren't, or targets that aren't the primary thing hit. What we know is that wave clearing on Zoe feels terrible. And so we want Zoe's wave clear to be better. And so we want to revert some version or remove some version of the AoE mod on Q. Now, the other consideration, though, is the body blocking gameplay of someone got slept, I'm going to walk in, I'm going to tank this Q. The reason there's a fall off there is if I tank it and my guy still took full damage, why did I bother tanking this? Now, of course, the radius on that circle is pretty small. And so it's of course possible to tank that and not have your teammate get hit, sure. But that's going to require some playtesting and figuring it out and ensuring if we like the output or not. Will we make the AoE only reduce damage to champions? Things to figure out here, but we really do want to make Zoe's wave clear better because the wave clear for Zoe feels terrible. And that means figuring some things out around the champion overall. We're happy to give her a bit of win rate. We don't think she's strictly weak by any means, but playing her feels pretty bad. And again, happy to cycle her in as a real champion. The other one is the one we initially identified was definitively Syndra is her best build is a high haste build. I think it's actually very easy to solve on a numbers from a numbers perspective. It's just very easy to tell that when you look at base damage versus AP ratios, of course her core build is Blackfire Torch Cosmic Drive. That's not hard to change with some numbers tweaks, so we'll just do that next patch. But wanted to kind of additionally investigate, are we happy with where durable mage items are, like Roa, like Leandries, identifying that Ari is doing this new Roa Leandries build here. So a bunch of item investigations to do in the mage space, as well as things like Dead Man's Plate and maybe Swifties. Basically trying to carve out some time to investigate what we want systems to be. Are we okay with the prevalence of these items? Are we okay with the outputs of the items if they're prevalent? Yes, no. Figure them out, put a chains together. Excuse me. And so that's something I'm probably going to be working on later on this week or the next week, to identify where we want these places to go and get builds into a decent spot. That's the video. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.